Um, I couldn't see you. See, you're hiding and I'm
I
gonna turn
already
that
said-
camera, I'm gonna turn that camera so
It
everybody
won't-
can see you.
It won't move. It will not move.
Well, you're gonna have to lean in one good time so my mom can see you. So who was, no, never mind, I won't ask. I have tried to watch and I can log in random times and places, but it just seemed to never work out. And then all the ones after me are like, yeah, I can watch that one. Yeah, I can be available for that one. But once I finish, will I still get, until May, I'll get the emails of anyone who is defending for the rest of the semester? I'd like to look I'd like to look for people in our cohort. It does delay, you're right.
That's why you gotta make sure it's in Zoom, because people will try to have it running off of like something other than just the desktop of disk, and it fights Zoom and it lags, it won't play, it asks for passwords.
That's not convenient.
No, it's not. That's why I tell people, bring it on the disk. Bring it on a disk.
Lord, I had to be able to hear. I mean, I'd have volume. Oh, here's some volume. Oh. It's just sitting on the screen. Right, so. This is. Okay, okay. Okay. Oh, maybe not, but forget that was again on mute. Mute. But. Mute my audio, so. You just, mute your audio. Like, I'm doing, you need to audio it. I have to read it. I won't be able to read it.
Dr. Neal, thank you for joining us.
Yes, I'm here.
All righty, I'm going to change this clock up here.
Hey, Dr. Neal.
Kayce.
Right.
You're gonna do great.
I'm gonna hold you to it.
You got this.
I asked Dr. Lamb if I had made his life miserable enough that he was ready to get rid of me. He said, yeah, he told me
I did not say that.
right now.
I think our clock
I think the clock says it's gonna be 6:30.
has given up.
1:56.
All right, we're good. We're getting ready to get started here.
I'm gonna turn my video off for a few minutes,
All right.
but I'm here.
All right, I'm gonna turn the.
You ready for me to close the door?
I am. All right. And so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make this small so it won't hurt your screen a minute. Get this. All right, make sure your clicker's working now. There we go. All right, good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us today. This is the final defense of Kayce Cook. She's a candidate for the Doctor of Education degree in Organizational Leadership at Gardner-Webb University. I'd like to thank her two committee members, Dr. Elizabeth Jones and Dr. Malia Neal for joining me today. Thank all the rest of you who are with us. At this time, without further ado, Kayce, if you will present your final dissertation.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Dr. Lamb, thank you. Dr. Jones, thank you for being here. And Dr. Neal, thank you for joining us online. It's good to see you. I'm excited for today. The title of my study is Ripple Effects, a study on organizational turnover within a state education agency. My research examines the ripple effects of employee turnover within a state-level education agency, specifically how patterns of turnover impact organizational stability, employee perceptions, and the agency's ability to effectively support educational systems. I want to say I did not arbitrarily select this organization as my partner. I chose it because I have experienced firsthand the consequences of turnover within this very organization, both as a local education agency, as a teacher, and then as a district personnel, and then as a State Department personnel. So it was important to me to select intentionally the state agency after I became employed there. So I'll start with just a little bit of an overview. In 2021, I transitioned from a district level position to the State Department, and I had a clear and focused purpose. I wanted to improve what was within my sphere of influence at the State Department because I wanted to strengthen the support and the systems that we utilize to serve the local education agencies. I had already experienced the impact of both of those systems, both when they functioned effectively and when they didn't. And I was genuinely curious about the reasons behind local education agencies' perceptions around State Department employees and the State Department agency in general. I also wanted to contribute to meaningful change genuinely. So when I left my district position and went to the State Department, that was part of my purpose. So what I found while I was there was a recurring pattern of instability. High turnover had caused significant operational breakdowns. Institutional and historical knowledge was lost when the people left who held that knowledge. And simple questions asked of the State Department became very long delays. And that was just one example of the impact of turnover. It's both internal and external. So thank you. Do we record? Are we recording? So I'll talk a little bit about the theoretical framework. Dr. Lamb, do I need to pause or keep going?
Keep going.
Okay. I'm going to go back one just at the bottom. So my study was guided by Maslow's hierarchy of needs and Herzberg's two-factor theory. This study investigated both the causes and consequences of turnover in the agency context. My research asked questions such as what's driving the turnover? How is it impacting the agency? How is it impacting local education agencies? And most importantly, what can we do about it? And so to answer those questions, I gathered real-time feedback from agency employees using both quantitative and qualitative data, as well as collecting perspectives to inform some of those patterns and trends that I found in the quantitative data. So the state education agency employs approximately 1,230 employees. Each division, there's several divisions, and each division is composed of specialized offices that work collaboratively to fulfill the agency's greater responsibilities. While the overarching structure of the state agency is centralized in authority, it includes distributed leadership across directors, team leads, and associates. So there's both a vertical and a horizontal coordination within this agency. And this enables the agency to manage complex educational priorities while still maintaining some internal accountability and alignment with broader state and federal goals. So for manageability, my study focused on one specific division within 5 divisions of the agency. That division is responsible for driving student preparedness for K-12 and post-secondary success. And then within that division, I concentrated on 2 individual offices. Both of these were comprised together of about 80 staff members. And within both of those offices, they had experienced turnover, and it was impacting the effectiveness and efficiency of the office. So to better understand the internal dynamics of the group, I conducted an organizational analysis using the McKinsey 7S model outlined in detail in my dissertation on pages 6 through 9. The model provided a comprehensive lens through which to assess the interconnected elements influencing employee satisfaction and turnover, including structure, strategy, systems, shared value, style, staff, and skills. So by narrowing the scope to those 2 smaller offices within the larger system, I was able to investigate conditions more deeply, gain insight into turnover, how it manifested, what impact leadership had, communication, professional growth, so on and so forth. So the purpose of my study was twofold. The first and primary objective was to identify those factors that contributed to turnover. And then to attempt to reduce attrition. The secondary objective was to explore the impact on local education agencies. By exploring both root causes and broader impacts, the study offers what I feel like is a more complete understanding of the issue. That's what makes the work both timely and actionable, because the goal wasn't just to name the problem, but to identify some practical strategies to mitigate the problem, which would drive meaningful improvement. So the 4 research questions I asked, first, I wanted to know what factors contributed to turnover among state government employees. This helps identify the core reasons behind attrition, things like leadership quality, recognition, and career growth. Secondly, I explored how turnover impacts those LEAs or local education agencies. This question moved the lens outward to understand how the agency turnover affects external partners and districts. Third, I examined the organizational factors, including employee motivation and satisfaction contributing to turnover. And this question focused on workplace conditions such as culture, communication, engagement, and access to resources, professional learning. And finally, I asked what practical strategies can leaders implement to reduce turnover and enhance satisfaction. And so the goal with the 4th question was to move into a solutions-oriented perspective. Together, these questions offer a comprehensive picture of the turnover challenge and the opportunities we have for improvement. So there were some study limitations that I would mention. This is outlined in the dissertation on page 15. But one pretty significant limitation that I think is worth mentioning is that the study doesn't fully explore how the changing political climate impacts your data and the mindsets and perceptions of those employed. So for example, when a new state superintendent or governor is elected, they might bring new leadership. They may restructure or reorganize offices. They may reprioritize, even change funding sources or hire people at different rates of salary. Those changes can introduce some level of uncertainty and it can affect job security, morale. And while these broader political and structural shifts were acknowledged, deeper analysis of their direct impact was outside the scope of the research. Also recognize that bureaucratic structures affect how decisions are made and how flexible the agency can be, which in turn impacts employee satisfaction. For example, when small decisions like attending a conference or simply adjusting your work schedule requires multiple layers of approval, that can impact employee morale, make employees feel micromanaged or undervalued. Another limitation is data were collected during a specific time. So in such a dynamic environment as a state agency, conditions can shift quickly due to variable changes. What was true during data collection can evolve, meaning the findings just simply reflect a snapshot of time over the course of the study. And lastly, the study relied on self-reported survey and interview data. Insights depend on honesty, accuracy, as well as the current feelings and perceptions of those that participated in the study. So that's worth mentioning as well, because those perceptions and current feelings can have or should be considered in research because they can have an impact on the answers and responses that you get for your qualitative data. I will not go through all of the terms, but I just wanted to mention that the terms are defined on page 19 in the dissertation. They were carefully selected because either these terms framed my research, they appeared frequently in participant respondent responses, and they also appeared in the foundational research behind the conceptual framework. So for example, terms like turnover, institutional knowledge, psychological safety surfaced more than once, both in the literature and in the participant feedback. And by establishing clear definitions up front, I was able to maintain consistency in the study and ensure that the interpretation remained aligned over the course of the study. So on pages 44 and 45 of the dissertation, we will see the literature review outline, and I'll share a couple of facts with you today. So what we're noticing across sectors is not just a revolving door of employees. It is a system-wide disruption that affects productivity, continuity, and ultimately the quality of public service delivery. The broader context underscores the urgency of this study. Turnover, especially in public education, is more than a staffing issue. It impacts consistency and effectiveness of the support that we provide to schools, educators, and students. This is why my literature review focuses not only on the root causes and costs of turnover, but also on the cultural and organizational conditions that determine whether employees choose to leave, stay, or thrive. The research surfaced several key themes that directly inform the direction of this study. First, turnover is expensive. It includes both direct and indirect costs. The loss of experienced staff disrupts internal operations and service delivery. Voluntary turnover was especially concerning across the literature. It's frequently triggered by poor leadership, burnout, limited advancement opportunities, inadequate or inequitable compensation, which are factors that organizations do have the power to address. Job satisfaction came up frequently, organizational culture, leadership style, those were consistently highlighted throughout the literature. Positive cultures tend to promote engagement and retention, while toxic or inefficient cultures contribute to turnover and burnout. Other important factors included recognition. Work-life balance was a significant factor. Employees reported that being seen and valued often meant more than salary increases, and that showed up in the quantitative data and the qualitative data, and I'm excited to share some of that today. And lastly, stress and burnout were also found to be key contributors of turnover, particularly, or even when employees enjoy their jobs, they can leave when chronic stress becomes an issue. So these recurring themes, satisfaction, communication, leadership, culture, workload, these laid the groundwork for my research questions and ultimately shaped the structure of the study. So this is the conceptual framework that I want to highlight. So I applied two theoretical frameworks that guided the study, which are discussed in detail on pages 64 through 75 in my dissertation. The research was grounded in two foundational, respected, and time-tested theories of motivation. Of course, Maslow's hierarchy of needs and Herzberg's two-factor theory. Together, these models provided a lens to understand not only why turnover happens, but what employees need in order to stay. Maslow's hierarchy of needs was first introduced in 1943. It's later refined in 1954 and has continued to be expanded over time. It proposes that individuals are motivated by 5 ascending levels of need, from physiological survival to self-actualization. In the context of the workplace, the theory helps us understand that employee motivation is not one size fits all. It truly depends on where people are in the hierarchy. At the most basic level, employees need job security, they need fair wages, and they need a safe work environment. Once those needs are met, belonging, recognition, and respect become the focus. And of course, as you can see at the top, self-actualization reflects that desire that people have for meaningful work, purpose-driven work, and for personal, professional growth. If an organization wants to improve motivation and retention, it has to meet employees at every level of the hierarchy, not just at the bottom. Herzberg's two-factor theory, which was published along with some contributing researchers and authors in 1959, distinguishes between two categories of workplace factors. Hygiene factors like salary, job security, and working conditions are necessary to prevent dissatisfaction, but they don't actually or necessarily motivate people. Motivators such as achievement, recognition, and growth are what truly inspire satisfaction and commitment. According to Herzberg, the absence of the hygiene factors can create dissatisfaction, but their presence alone doesn't drive motivation or engagement. Long-term retention and fulfillment, for long-term retention and fulfillment, motivators are a must. So where Maslow focuses on what needs must be fulfilled to motivate, Herzberg helps us understand why someone might feel satisfied or dissatisfied and how that feeling shapes their behavior in a workplace environment. These frameworks were were especially relevant in, I felt like, a public sector context where resources are often limited in state government. Strategic leadership and culture building can make a significant difference. Both models help frame my understanding of turnover in this setting, and more importantly, they helped me identify what organizational conditions are most likely to support retention, engagement, and satisfaction. So my methodology and research design is detailed on page 80 in my dissertation. My study employed a mixed methods, sequential explanatory design. Don't want to say that too many times over and over really quickly. It's allowed me to identify first broad measurable trends and then explore the lived experiences that explain those trends. So the two-phase approach was especially well suited to the complexity of the topic because turnover is not just about data points. It's also about people's perceptions, their experiences, and interactions with the organization. So the first phase of data collection included a 20-item Likert scale survey, along with 20 corresponding open-ended questions. These were combined into a single Google form and administered anonymously. The design allowed participants to rate each item and then expand on their answers in their own words. Every item was intentionally aligned with one of the 4 research questions, which helped strengthen construct validity, ensuring that the data gathered directly reflected the intended focus of the study. To further support the instrument's face validity, I designed the survey questions in Qualtrics and used the optimization tools to ensure clarity and structure. I also worked with a content expert from within the organization who reviewed the survey for clarity and relevance and for to acknowledge the real actual challenges that the agency faced. Survey responses were stored securely, and all identifying information will be destroyed once the study concludes and final approval is granted. To support reliability, I used a 60% response threshold to interpret my Likert scale responses. Any item with 60% or more agreement or disagreement was considered reliable because it indicated a clear trend in employee sentiment. Based on the common themes that emerged from the open-ended responses, I conducted 8 follow-up interviews. These were semi-structured interviews. They lasted about 45 minutes each and were conducted virtually using Microsoft Teams. Participants were assigned pseudonyms because it was confidential, and the interviews were recorded and transcribed using the built-in tools of the Microsoft Teams platform. For the qualitative analysis, in vivo software was used to code, categorize, and organize responses into themes that surfaced across the data collected. This design allowed me to integrate the numerical data with the narrative insights, revealing not only what the patterns were, but why they existed. That ultimately is what I feel gave my study depth. Together, the design, the methodology, and the analysis provided a rigorous, well-rounded approach that supports the findings and recommendations that we'll explore in the next slides. And just to recap the study participants, as we talked about, the survey was distributed to 80 employees across the 2 offices. There were 48 in one office and 32 employees in the other. I had 31 people respond, which gave me 38.75%, and then, 38.75, and then I interviewed 8 participants. The anonymity and survey and confidentiality of the interviews laid the groundwork for authentic responses, and I believe ultimately contributed to the credibility of the data. Also, no identifying information was collected at this time during the survey phase. That or the interview phase, it was kept confidential, and that was intentional to allow employees to feel confident sharing their authentic feedback candidly without worry. Just another quick peek at the breakdown of the 2 primary types of data collected in the study. You can see the quantitative data on the left, qualitative data on the right. I used a 4-point scale for my Likert scale survey. Again, open-ended questions, and distributed that to 80 employees, and I got 31 responses. The qualitative responses were both written and verbal, and that gave me what I felt like was narrative depth to better understand why. So I got to see what they responded in those open-ended questions that were attached to the survey that also were intentionally paired with one of the 4 questions, but then I got to use that information to build those interview questions, which allowed me to go a little bit deeper. And that's why it was semi-structured, because it let me be a little more authentic in the conversation, but to keep it guided toward the themes that were identified in that survey data that was open-ended. I do want to mention an interesting observation here, Dr. Lamb, and particularly because it reminds me of something you said in class, but one interesting observation during the data collection was that the majority of the people who participated in my survey came from the one office where I had previously worked. The other office where I had not built those relationships had very low participation. And I thought that was intriguing because it underscores something important about internal organizational research, which is around trust and visibility, and they matter. So in a large bureaucratic system where communication is already fragmented, relationships really do significantly influence engagement. And, you know, I got a larger return where I had relationships and lower return where I didn't. So I found that very interesting as well. So we'll start with the quantitative data themes. Now that we've reviewed how the data was collected, I'll begin with the quantitative results, which are also outlined within the dissertation, but also on Appendix E, which is on page 194. The slide summarizes the 7 major themes identified from the Likert scale responses. These themes reflect areas that respondents consistently connected to their dissatisfaction motivation, and decisions to either stay or leave. So we'll start with the first two themes, which are not in any particular order, but they emerged from the quantitative data. Salary compensation was a concern. We'll talk more about that in just a moment. That was interesting too. Career growth and professional development were also some themes that were identified. So starting with compensation, you'll see 51% of respondents agreed that financial reasons do contribute to turnover. However, that item didn't meet that 60% threshold. So I could not say that that was statistically significant. As a matter of fact, what that tells us is that while it does have some influence, it's not a driving influence of turnover. According to Herzberg's two-factor theory, compensation is a hygiene factor, meaning it doesn't necessarily motivate employees, but the absence of it can contribute to dissatisfaction and ultimately attrition. In contrast, career growth and professional development emerged as a much stronger influence. 87% of respondents indicated that career advancement opportunities affect retention. 81% agreed that lack of growth opportunities contributes to turnover. These responses far exceeded the 60% threshold and reflect a clear pattern of concern. This theme aligns with findings by Lewis and others who note that limited advancement is a frequent cause of voluntary exits, particularly in public organizations. Career development was also shown to be directly tied to satisfaction and retention, especially in environments where workloads can be really high and expectations are really complex. So while pay matters, growth opportunities matter more within the agency. Work-life balance, flexibility, leadership, and communication were among the other themes. 84% said that work-life balance directly influences their decision to stay or leave a position. And notably, 100% of respondents agreed that having clear expectations around work-life balance is essential. This reflects what we're seeing in national workforce trends in modern data. Employees, especially younger generations, prioritize flexibility and environments that honor personal well-being. On the leadership front, the results were more striking. 96% of respondents indicated that leadership quality influences turnover. 97% emphasized the importance of regular and clear communication. The data reinforces what the literature has long said. Effective leadership improves satisfaction, poor communication erodes morale, and leads to disengagement and dissatisfaction. 93% of participants said that acknowledgement impacts, oops, I switched, I got the wrong slide. I'm sorry, so sorry. I clicked on the wrong slide. 93% of participants said that acknowledgement impacts retention, and 94% agreed that it enhances motivation. What stood out to me here is that recognition doesn't have to be financial to matter. Employees just want to be seen. They want to be valued for their contributions. Something as simple and timely as praise or acknowledgement from a supervisor can carry significant weight according to the qualitative feedback. 97% said that culture drives motivation and retention. And every single respondent, 100%, agreed that positive culture is essential. These responses confirm that workplace culture is not just a background condition, it's central to how employees experience their work, how committed they feel, and ultimately whether they decide to stay or look elsewhere. A healthy culture fosters connection, loyalty, and trust, all of which are essential to building a stable and motivated workforce. And finally, organizational impacts of turnover, where I took it a little bit more broadly. So we move from inside the agency to what are the external impacts of turnover within the agency. 90% of survey respondents reported that turnover disrupts local education agencies. There was no argument about that. It weakens instructional efficacy. 77% acknowledged that financial burden, that even LEAs experience a financial burden when there's turnover, not just in the agency, but resulting turnover even in those external LEAs. What these respondents reveal is that turnover doesn't just affect internal staffing. It creates that ripple effect that impacts the entire system. Services are interrupted, credibility for the state agency that monitors and implements those initiatives can decline, and the consistency of program implementation can suffer over time. And the cost is not just operational, it's financial for both the agency and the LEAs. So this was interesting, and I wanted to share this specifically, but according to the research, which is cited in my literature review on page 47 and 48, replacing one employee can cost between 150% to 200% of that employee's annual salary. So we're thinking about taxpayer-funded state agency and public schools. But when you factor in production, recruitment, onboarding, and lost institutional knowledge, which results in a repeat of creating behaviors, memories, processes, procedures, but relationships within that agency. Additionally, costs are compounded. Now, this was significant, I thought too, but costs were compounded when when poor performing employees were selected to replace employees who had left. That can lead to an additional estimated 30% loss in the first year of employment. So to offer some perspective and looking back through the lens through a state agency, let's take a single employee that earns an average salary of $70,000 a year, which is what the average salary is at the state agency. If you replace that one employee, it can cost anywhere from $105,000 to $140,000 when you foster in things like recruitment, time, onboarding, training, lost productivity, lost institutional knowledge. But the cost doesn't just stop there. As the literature indicated, if a poorly performing replacement is hired, which is unfortunately common when you have instability in an organization, the organization can lose an additional 30%. That's another $21,000 in losses. So in total, the cost to taxpayers of losing one $70,000 a year employee could reach $161,000. And that's just for one employee. So it's a significant topic to explore, and it's a significant topic to identify logical, doable solutions that can work in a state agency where it's a rigid, political, sometimes and bureaucratic structure. Taken together, these results underscore that turnover isn't simply a personal matter. It's a systems level issue with real consequences for performance, financial, and most importantly, the students in schools that the agency is expected to support. Moving into the qualitative themes, this portion of the research allowed me to go beyond those percentages and raw numbers, which I've also included in the appendices in the back of my dissertation. Through open-ended responses and follow-up interviews, participants provided rich first-hand insight into what it was like working in the setting, what motivates them, what challenges them, and what pushes them out. So as you can see on this slide, 8 major themes emerged from the qualitative analysis. Many of these mirror the quantitative findings, which was expected, but I think that strengthens the reliability of the data. Narratives behind the themes do add context, they add emotion and clarity to the numbers that we've already reviewed. So we'll take a close look, and I've included some literature to support some of these qualitative themes here, and I've also included quotes from some of the participants to support some of these findings as well. But as we discussed earlier, as compensation wasn't universally cited as a primary reason for leaving, it clearly influenced morale and motivation, particularly when there were inequities and inconsistencies that were perceived in the agency. Participants emphasized that while pay alone doesn't ensure satisfaction, it does shape how they feel. It shapes how they feel they're valued. Career advancement and professional growth. Respondents frequently described a lack of structured pathways for promotion within the agency and insufficient leadership development opportunities. These created gaps that left many employees feeling stagnant about their future within the agency. Qualitative themes 3 and 4 were leadership, influence, and of course, that work-life balance. One of the offices surveyed for this study experienced 3 directors in 1 year. As one participant explained, turnover really disrupts the work that we do. Anytime a new employee comes in, the clock essentially resets and initiatives can potentially start all over. Or you have to start from the beginning instead of where you were in the process of implementation. This could be true within any agency or organization. That one sentence captures the disruption turnover can cause when leadership is inconsistent or not aligned. What I also found throughout the interviews was that leadership style or how people were managed, supported, and communicated with had a direct influence on whether employees feel stable or uncertain. Interestingly, there's a saying across the state agency that says, if you have a good idea, you have about 12 months to get it done, because at the end of the 12 months, the people that supported your idea are likely gone. Participants shared that ineffective leadership leads to mistrust, disconnection, and ultimately disengagement. In a similar way, the issue of work-life balance came through loud and clear. One participant mentioned reducing the need to commute would give me back valuable time, particularly because employees are from all over the state, but the office is centrally located. So if you're employed and you're from the outskirts of the state, you're commuting potentially 2.5 hours a day to work, whereas somebody can live in the middle of Columbia and travel 20 minutes. But if everybody has to come in equally, it causes a problem with the work-life balance and how many hours some associates spend traveling and not with their families or working. The issue of work-life balance, somebody also talked about flexibility. Since COVID, flexibility is no longer a luxury, it's an expectation. Participants, particularly younger professionals, expressed that rigid policies felt outdated and contributed to their dissatisfaction. We're seeing a lot of that now, just nationally. Together, these two themes revealed a deeper truth. Leadership and flexibility aren't just operational decisions. They're key components of how people experience their work, and it ultimately shapes whether or not people decide to stay or leave. As a matter of fact, when I look at the dashboard for our agency, and I'll say back when I was going through elementary school, I had the exact same principal for the entire time that I was there. When my son went to first grade in the same school, Mr. Ackerman was still the principal. But when we look at the state dashboard now, the longevity of teachers averages about all educators, no matter what role they perform, is 7 years. So times have changed, particularly now with that work-life balance and how long people are willing to commit to an organization where they feel undervalued, unseen, where the culture might be toxic, where there's not enough balance. And we see the effects of that in our agency dashboard as well. In themes 5 and 6, you see here that acknowledgement and recognition, again, communication and feedback. One participant shared that small gestures from team leads or the office director, just like simply saying good morning or acknowledging an effort, can make a big difference. That comment captured a repeated theme across responses. Employees want to feel seen. While recognition does not have to be grand or formal, participants made it clear that a lack of acknowledgement contributes to feeling invisible and unvalued. The second theme reflects more than just operational breakdowns. It reveals that communication and feedback piece reveals a deeper disconnect between leadership and staff. One participant shared that communication is unclear. Decisions are often made without employee input. And that sentiment was echoed repeatedly across both quantitative and qualitative findings. Participants described communication as inconsistent and top-down, lacking the transparency that would be needed in order to support that feeling of trust. It wasn't just about communication, it was also about feedback. One participant noted that I haven't seen any changes as a result of employee feedback that I've given, if they're even asked for feedback. That observation captured another key issue. When feedback loops are broken, or ignored or non-existent, employees begin to feel invisible. It signals that their insights aren't valued, their input isn't valued, and over time, it leads to disengagement and increased attrition. And together, these themes reinforce something that came through again and again. Employees don't just want to be managed. They want to be heard, they want to be respected, and genuinely included in the rhythms and decisions of the organization. And then the last two themes are organizational culture and the impact on the LEAs. One participant talked about the agency culture has not improved over years and that there's a great deal of room for growth. That comment reflects the sentiment that came up repeatedly. When culture is unclear, inconsistent, or fragmented, it weakens the sense of shared purpose and belonging. And the final theme focuses on the downstream impact of turnover. One participant talked again about the frustration when relationships have to be rebuilt when there's turnover. A new employee in the agency has to learn relationships externally and vice versa. The LEAs who were dependent on the human in the seat rather than the process or standard operating procedure lost that relationship and that connection when those employees left. So turnover doesn't just create those gaps internally, it's also externally as well. And then I'll just will quickly walk through. I've provided some quantitative data to support the findings of each of the 4 research questions and some of the supporting literature that's also found within the literature review and the dissertation. So the finding of research question 1 about factors that contribute to turnover were, in fact, that career advancement, leadership and work-life balance, and acknowledgement are among primary factors. Again, salary at 51%, it showed some influence, but not a significant influence and didn't meet the threshold, but all others did. So number 1, those findings were affirmed. How does turnover within the state education government impact local education agencies and instructional efficacy and academic outcomes? Through the quantitative and qualitative data, findings confirm that turnover at the state agency has far-reaching implications for LEAs, instructional efficiency, efficacy, and educational outcomes. I've provided data there, some quotes, and some complementary data from findings from the literature review that supports that finding. In question 3, what organizational factors influence employee motivation and satisfaction and contribute to turnover within state education offices? So employees mentioned workplace culture, support, access to resources, professional development, engagement opportunities to just connect and feel like they belong, and not just in their office, but across offices, communication, and the value of feedback all were critical organizational factors that influenced employee motivation and satisfaction. And then question 4, the practical strategies or the solutions that organizational leaders can implement to reduce turnover. Again, giving attention to professional growth opportunities, giving opportunities for work-life balance, particularly taking into account from where employees commute. Feedback and communication loops or communication feedback loops were another strategy. Some kind of predictable culture of recognition was another strategy. And building workplace culture of being intentional about building a more positive workplace culture was also another strategy. The study data, you can see 100% talked about work-life balance and the significance of that. That's a very significant statistic, as well as culture. 100% agreed that positive culture is essential for retention. And we had a lot of data that said the same thing. And so the findings aligned with what, for the literature review, the research revealed. And just revisiting again, the conceptual framework that I applied for my study. I used Maslow's hierarchy. It helped explain participants' desire for that belonging, that culture piece, the recognition and growth needs that were frequently unmet and contributed to job dissatisfaction and turnover. And then Herzberg's two-factor theory. That provided a lens to distinguish between the dissatisfaction drivers like salary and poor leadership, and to identify motivators like acknowledgement, career growth, which align closely with both my quantitative and qualitative findings. I won't go over this one, but I did share here is the same view. It's just narrative as opposed to using that image. But the previous slide illustrated the broader alignment visually, and this one simply captures specific explanatory power behind the two theories that were applied. The application row, by the way, captures the big picture that the frameworks help transform my data points into actionable insights. They provided a consistent research-based lens for understanding what employees need, what drives them, and what practical steps leaders can take to strengthen motivation and reduce turnover. And so the recommendations that I shared in my chapter 5 of the dissertation are rooted in the quantitative and qualitative data collected during the study and supported by the conceptual framework. They also are directly shaped by the lived experiences of the participants who filled out the survey and who also completed the interview. So career advancement opportunities. Many participants expressed deep frustration with limited mobility, unclear promotional pathways, and perceptions. So to address this, I recommended establishing career and transparent career pathways, or authentically communicating when you reach the end of that pathway. So it's that communication piece, offering structured professional development to align job roles and creating leadership development programs and ensuring equitable access to growth opportunities. Leadership influence was one of the most frequently cited influences on turnover. So the recommendation is for leadership development that emphasizes transformational leadership and emotional intelligence, transparent decision-making processes, feedback loops where employee input is not only invited but acted upon, and holding leaders accountable for using satisfaction and retention metrics. For workplace culture and engagement, participants describe feeling disconnected and unsupported. Some of the recommendations include fostering cross-departmental collaboration, empowering employees to actually lead engagement initiatives, develop inclusive recognition practices, and conduct regular culture assessments. Work-life balance, since 100% of survey respondents identified that as a retention factor, I recommend expanding remote or hybrid work options when and where appropriate, conducting workload assessments to ensure fair distribution and equitable distribution of work, as well as establishing those clear expectations around after-hours work. For recognition and feedback, I recommend standardized recognition programs to ensure fairness for all, promote peer-to-peer acknowledgement opportunities, make recognition timely, specific, and meaningful, and engage in transparent feedback loops. And for communication, to hold town hall style meetings or team check-ins to communicate decisions clearly and transparently with a rationale when appropriate, and use centralized digital tools to improve information flow across departments. These strategies in the recommendation section not only reflect what the data revealed, but also what participants expressed a genuine need for. And then I have provided a sample of an action planning from 1 to about 15 months where the agency or any organization in a similar position could implement recommended actions intentionally, thoughtfully, and over a period of time. That plan is broken into 4 key phases with suggested timelines and actions to ensure continuous improvement. I feel like I rushed through, but I could talk about it for 5 hours if you let me. But as I close this presentation, I do want to briefly return to where it all began. Not with the data or the theories, but with a deeply personal commitment to understanding and improving the system that I stepped into just a few years ago. When I entered this doctoral program, I came in with questions. I wanted to know why systems were supposed to support, why the systems that were supposed to support schools and students sometimes felt like barriers. I wanted to know why progress felt fragile, why good ideas stalled, and why instability seemed like the norm rather than the exception. I chose to focus on this particular state agency, not because it was abstract or academic, but because I had lived it. I had seen what happens, or I've seen what happens when turnover strips away continuity, when knowledge disappears, when processes vanish or didn't exist in the first place, and when the same questions are asked again and again and again, simply because no one's left who remembers. The study gave me a way to examine those experiences through a research lens. It allowed me to gather not just anecdotes, but real data, quantitative and qualitative, from the people working within the system. Their insights and voices validated what I had seen and felt, and offered clarity on what needs to change. Through this process, I've come to believe even more strongly that leadership isn't about hierarchy. It's about creating conditions where people can truly thrive. It's about building structures that outlast individuals, where knowledge is shared, expectations are clear, and everyone feels seen, supported, and capable. That belief shows up in how I lead every day because of this program and because of this research, and I needed to just say that. It's been transformational for me. I've come to focus on building what I call an SOP, or standard operating procedure culture, in the agency, one that doesn't depend on a single person to function well, but instead relies on those clear systems and communication, consistent expectations, and shared ownership, because turnover is going to happen, particularly in state government. But its impact doesn't have to be catastrophic, especially if we lead well, plan well, and invest in the people doing the work. The study has impacted me deeply, not just as a researcher, but as a professional and as a leader. It sharpened my awareness, expanded my toolkit, and gave me the opportunity to really listen to the people that I now have the privilege to lead. When I entered the doctoral program, I had just started employment at the State Department as an ed associate. In the time I've been in this program and have applied what I've learned, I have ascended that ladder that is so hard, that has so few rungs, to team lead, to interim director, and now to director, and I have no doubt that the work that I've done in this program, the rigor in the study, has allowed me to progress and to reach that self-actualization that Maslow talks about. So I wanted to say that. Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to share my research and to share this journey, and for what you've done to impact me as a professional. And I'm ready to take questions.
All right.
I hope you
well,
don't
we'll
have
get
any.
started. All right, we'll start with Dr. Neal. She's already turned her camera on. She's ready.
Great job, Kayce. You did quite well. I've read it so many times, and you've been so thorough with your outline and your presentation and your paper. Did anything truly surprise you in your findings as you really analyzed your data? Were you kind of caught off guard by anything?
I really was caught off guard by the 51%. There is so much conversation around, particularly right now, around salary disparity. That also has to do with that change in leadership over time. When people are brought into the agency under different leaders, they're brought in at different pay bands. But when those leaders leave and new people are brought in, those pay bands can shift. Interestingly, I thought that it would be more significant, that the data would show that it had more of a significance in people's motivation or willingness to stay. But what surprised me was that it didn't. People were not really interested in that and would flat out, we're biased when we're listening, especially, when we've experienced it. And so I had to keep myself in check when people would say, no, I don't even care. I'll stay somewhere where I'm happy and make significantly less money than, go somewhere for more money that has a toxic culture. And so that was surprising, because the literature said that salary disparity, pay, compensation, that the monetary part was significant, but it really didn't show up as significant in the data. So that was surprising to me. Most everything else was really not.
Very good. Did you have a hard time keeping, because when doing a study like this where you're in the organization, your bias is in check?
You know, if I wouldn't have I would not have approached the study the same way if I still worked within the two offices where I studied. I had moved out of those offices into a completely different area of the building and a completely different area, whereas that office had a different focus. Mine is now completely different. I wouldn't have been as comfortable being in that office and doing the study. One, because I'm there. It would have been awkward during the survey, data collection and interview process. So being separated from it allowed me to keep my bias in check, as opposed to being there too. And I had been removed long enough that I don't think that people within the office expected me to take a position. I had already been removed long enough that they spoke freely as though I hadn't been there, but they knew me.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Neal. Dr. Jones?
Yeah, I had that very same question about bias. She beat me to it, you know, I said, you know, I actually wrote down bias and I see this a lot in people and candidates that I work with, you know, when you study your own organization or when you go into a research study with a preconceived notion, you know, it can certainly change the course of your dissertation, and you have to be really careful about that. So I did have that question, but thank you for answering it.
I was just gonna say on that note, and it was in here, I was looking through to find it for you, but Dr. Lamb and I talked about that, and so he allowed me to include, but he made me reduce it, and my mom said, I told her I would tell you this, that she was very disappointed in all the things I had to remove, because she thought they were great in my dissertation, and she told me to say that, and funny. But he let me leave a section in where I talked about the role of the researcher. We had kind of moved that piece out as this program evolved, but he let me leave it in because I talked specifically about that bias and ethical research. So I was very intentional to keep myself in check and not to lead the conversations, which was one of the reasons I wanted the open-ended questions that had nothing to do with me, and then only did 8 interview questions, and I just needed to get a little more detail. So that was another way that I was able to keep that bias from being a factor.
Right. So
The whole thing.
can you talk just a minute about how you developed your survey questions based on and interview questions based on your research questions? Because I know those are always tied together. Can you talk just a little bit about how that worked in your study?
Yes, and that was interesting too, and it might be a little different for me because I went into the study knowing what I wanted to learn more about as far as that agency lens, but then I had to make that connection with the literature. Dr. Lamb had to help me through that because I'm over here wanting to study these particular things, but he kept saying, what is the literature going to tell you about retention? What's the literature going to tell you about satisfaction and motivation? You can't create your survey until you know what the literature is going to tell you. Because I already had like 10 questions that I wanted to use. And he, of course, he pared me down, but then he did not pare me down enough when it came to my quantitative questions. I had 20, 20, and 10 two-part questions, which was a huge mistake. I would never do that again. So if anybody out there's listening, keep it narrow, keep your focus narrow. And you told me, but I did it anyway. But I did have to go back to the literature, and I had to look at what the literature said about retention, what Maslow and Herzberg said about satisfaction, what they said about motivation, what they said about the hygiene factors. And it was good that I did that because it did change my perspective. My questions became more objective and based on what I found in the literature and less subjective, which was my initial version because it was what I wanted to learn more about. If I had used my own questions, I could not have matched it with the literature. There wouldn't have been a connection. Yeah.
Yeah, and so that was, you led right into my last comment. It's not a question, but you did a really good job of tying the things from your results of your quantitative and qualitative survey questions to the literature. And, you know, I'm all about the literature. I think it informs, it gives you a basis, a foundation sort of kickstart your study. So, good job with that. And actually, it was a really good presentation. So congratulations.
Thank you very much. As a matter of fact, on the literature piece too, I know it's important to use a variety of time periods. And initially, I was looking at the seminal work or the original, the foundational work and what the old literature said, because in many ways it doesn't change. What motivates people doesn't change. But when you said you need a little bit more current data, that's when I started noticing that there were general workforce challenges that have evolved. And that's where that work-life balance piece came in. That
Yeah.
wasn't something that you saw a lot in the literature because it's brand new. It's within 5 years
Well,
of
and you
literature.
mentioned COVID,
Right.
you can't talk about employee retention and turnover without talking about COVID. Because it changed everything.
Right.
And I don't know, we're 5 years out now from the start of COVID, but I'm sure we'll learn more about the impact that it has had on not just work-life balance, but all of the things that motivate people
Right.
in the work environment.
And what we're also seeing is that people will leave a work environment to not have to commute as much and take less pay to
Mhm.
do it, because work-life balance matters to people now after COVID.
Yeah.
I'm sure it mattered to all of us before, but we got a taste of what that feels like, what's possible, what can be done, which is where that autonomy and trust piece came in, and in the qualitative data where people would talk about leadership having trust and giving autonomy for people to make decisions about where they can work and be most effective, instead of that optics of you aren't in the office, you're not working. That was a post-COVID piece of
Mhm.
literature that you wouldn't find if you just stuck with the foundational literature about motivation and satisfaction.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Very good. I do want to thank your partner at, Department of Education who helped with the content validity as well.
Mhm.
We
That's right.
did run it by a content expert there and for that, but Kayce spoke to her construct validity, aligning her constructs from her research questions. She spoke to her face validity of building the survey and the content validity. She linked all her literature. She circled back to her theoretical framework. I would make one argument that I think your research is completely consistent on the money with Hertzberg in terms of it won't motivate you to stay, but it can make you leave. If it's not adequate enough. But so that's the notion here. Some things just need to be adequate. And what this does, it kind of gives us a roadmap as leaders to what's the important thing? What hill do you want to die on? These things, if they're good enough, they'll make you stay, but these things will make people, if this is more important. And I think what has happened is, and of course, I never thought I'd live to be this old in my lifestyle, but I never thought I'd live to be a time where work-life balance is more important than money, but we've got there since COVID. This is the second study that I've been blessed to be a part of that has pointed that out. We did a study in all the principals in one district, all of them in one district in North Carolina, and work-life balance is more important than money. And that study as well, done it just since COVID. Before COVID, that was not a thing. It is a thing now. I think your work is on the cutting edge here. I mean, this is kind of a new starting point, and I'm glad that you're there. You've done an excellent job. You've been a great student. I don't have anything else to say. So we're gonna have you step out while Dr. Neal and Dr. Jones and you just take her over to the office. She's at the big chair. Let me get this thing. All right, Dr. Neal, I believe I've made a breakout room for you.
There you are.
There you are. Well, that was very good.
Yeah.
Yes.
Good job.
That was very good.
Yes, you
That
did.
was kind of the model right there.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
what we want.
Yeah.
Yes.
I sat through a retention study last week, right here in this very seat. And I sat here and I didn't, I know. you
Oh,
want-
it's still recording. Do you want to stop the recording?
Yeah, but that's fine. Let me
Okay.
recording. Let me record. All right, and now I need to change my view. There we go. Finally got it to go. All right. I'll present Dr. Kayce Cook. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. Can we hug? Thank you.
Congratulations.
Great job.
Great job. Great job.
Did a great job.
I'm sending you a big hug.
Thank you. Hey, Monique.
All right, those of you, thank you, Monique, for joining us today. The new Dr. Kirk as well. Go ahead and, if you want to unmute, if anybody would like to say something.
Congrats, Dr. Cook. I'm so excited for you. It's been such a blessing getting to know you over the past couple of years as we work through this and navigated this journey together. I just want to say I'm proud of the work you're doing for our South Carolina schools. I'm in the trenches in a school in Rock Hill, and so I love all the work you're doing for the State Department, and your dissertation was so solid and so thorough, and it was so needed. So I cannot wait to buy a copy and share it with colleagues and everybody here. So, but congrats, Dr. Cook. I'm so proud of you.
Thank you so much, friend. I appreciate that. Thank you. That might be my mom, and if it is, she probably doesn't know how to unmute. It took her 5 minutes to mute. If that's you, Mom, hey.
You should be proud, Mom.
Yeah.
My children were on, they've already texted me. My mom was there. They probably hung up. My dad just texted too. Yeah, they were all tuned
Well,
in.
good.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
Good.
congratulations. You really did
Did a great
a
job.
great job.
thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you. I enjoyed it. It was hard work and I cried a lot. And the work I found.
Well, it's
was
you don't
something-
get a doctorate without some tears.
Oh, yeah. That's just part of the program.
It is.
Yeah, we built a house, while I was in this program. I moved each year. I was in the program because we were wanting to build, but COVID changed our plans. And so now we were just trying to figure out where we were gonna live for another year, but now we're in a house and I've, changed jobs twice and lost 2 sisters in those 3 years, just
Oh.
recently to cancer. So you definitely make sacrifices when you're in a program like this, but I was fully committed and gave it my all. So I'm very excited and
You did it.
I picked the right program for me.
Yeah.
I really did. Thank you.
That's great. All right. Well, thank you all for
All
joining
right.
us today. I'm
Thank
gonna
you.
sign off.
Thank you.
Thank
Good job, Kayce. Will you be at graduation?
I will. Yeah,
Great. Well, I will see you there.
sounds good. I look forward to it.
All right. Thank y'all.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Hi.